Welcome to a new episode of Art with George. Last time we left off, we had just started drawing the library, Plainville Library, and we're actually continuing now. I did a little bit on my own, and tonight I'm going to actually work on segments of the facade in the front. That's probably the hardest thing to actually visualize. How would one show different colorations in different segments without using color? The trick to that is just using more and more stipple in different bricks. And that's one problem. The other problem is the windows. Because of the time of the day, certain parts of the windows are dark and certain other ones are lighter. The way to do that again is stipple. The dark part of the window, I'm really actually going to make it full black. Those be the bottom segments. So I'm actually just going to make those solid black, and as we rise to a higher level, probably around midsection, we're actually just going to put a few stipples. They're still going to be very close together, so it's almost going to be solid anyway. We're going to do a few breakage right there so they're not so close together. However, towards the bottom of that particular window, they are going to be a little bit fuller. As we get closer to the top, less and less stipple. If you look in a picture, you could see that what's done with the camera, we are assimilating by using stipple. And the top is going to be even lighter, less and less stipple. It's interesting because it's not nearly as difficult as you would imagine. It's a nice little magic trick if you can pull it off. Now, as you get to the top of these windows, where they start curving, less and less stipple altogether. What that does is create a kind of a little trick where a photograph can make that happen very easily. It's just so subtle in the way it's done. To do that in drawing is a whole different mess. It's a whole different type of mantra. So here we go, next set. We're going to try to do the next set. It's basically a repetition of what we had done in the previous one. Lighter on top, darker on the bottom. When it's done, it's going to look just, to me, an assimilation, perfect assimilation of the photograph without none of the, it could be reproduced, it could be made a print. It's just amazing what things you could do. And I was obviously not as perfect as the photograph. There's going to be certain allowances made, but it's pretty accurate. I didn't measure any of that. I know for one thing there are just the right number of windows. I guarantee you that because I did count those when I did the original drawing. But the thing is, you're just using a little magic trick to, instead of using the easiness of a photograph, you're recreating it in black and white. And it can reduce down to a postage stamp. I've done many drawings like this before, and it's amazing how far down they can get reduced. It works very nicely. Now, I don't want to bore you with too much of this, but you can see what direction I'm going in here. We're going to make the bottom of these windows solid, solid, solid. We could actually take your pen and just actually fill in the entire bottom with ink. I'm going to take my ruler and make sure I don't go too far below that line. All right, so that's basically how the windows will be approached. I want to show you about the facade. Each brick is a different shape and a different grouping of color. They're not all the same. And yet, the interesting thing is you don't want to have a false line in there either. You want each one, the mortar between each one of these, to not look awkward. in the end, I might actually go back over the mortar and darken it with stipple one more time. It is kind of boring, but the end result is what you got to keep in mind. All right, here we go again. I'll draw a bunch of these, and I'll show you what I mean by stipple in each one of these segments. A lot of people would look at this and say, boy, it looks easy, until you try it. It's kind of nerve-wracking. I also want to work on the steeple. I'll show you how that's done. And again, it's an assortment of line and crosshatch. Everything I do, it varies in the amount of line and crosshatch. I don't like using too much crosshatch when it comes to a structure like this. Steeple is really where I really have emphasis. And I really like the idea of double lines. It seems to be frustrating, but the mortar is actually two rows of line. And if you only put one line there, it looks kind of shallow, it looks narrow. It looks very, very inadequate. So if you do put in a double line, later on you could actually add a little bit of stipple in there, and it really will look thick. I could actually go freehand in a lot of this too. Sometimes if you look at the amount of mortar between each one of these blocks, they do vary. So by all means, I do go freehand every now and then. I want to show you, I'm going to do a section, and I'll show you what I mean by stipple. I want to get at least half of this front done in line, and then I could actually proceed to stipple between each one of these segments. I'll have a better idea of what I'm talking about. And by no means are these perfect. There is a little give and play with each one of these, and I'm trying to show that. That's one of the charms of this technique. It does look almost done by haphazard as opposed to accurate. And I think it's just a technique. It's Gregorian in nature. They do tend to look like they're just applied roughly. But if you look at it carefully, it's rather charming. It has an English cottage feel to it. Alright, so having done most of the breakage, I'm going to show you what I'm talking about when it comes to actually putting stipple in. And that way you can actually see how one or two are going to be darker than the rest. I love that feel. Alright, we're there. Stipple is as follows. And it's nerve-wracking. It's boring and it's nerve-wracking, and best done when you're not too don't have a lot of don't drink a lot of soda before this. Really have a nice quiet evening ahead of you. Here we go. First off, let me put one line up here. There is one solid true line there. Here we go. Let's try a couple. I'm going to look, make sure I stay true to the photograph. One, the first grouping of stipple is light, not that heavy. So you're trying to make each one of these dots or stipples appear haphazard and yet nice. Next one, you can make it a little bit darker. What you want is an assortment of very type of look. So the next one could be a bit darker. The next one could be like the previous one, not as dark. The whole time you're doing this, you have to refer back to your source and make sure you're not going too far from reality. You want to make sure you're staying true. If you stray too much, it's going to be noticeable, and God forbid somebody looks at the picture and notices that you are not accurate. The best thing you do is keep a little bit lighter. It's easier to darken up later. It's not easy to lighten up if you're going too dark. That's one problem with stipple. Okay, let's try and make a couple of light ones. Probably this one underneath. And the way to do that is simply not put as many stipples in. Now, having done this, you can actually see which ones could be darker. So I think I'll darken this corner one a bit more. That's how you really can gauge the amount of work you put in. You could look at what you've got as a whole and see which ones need to be darkened. You can't lighten them. All you could do at this point is darken the ones that could be darkened. So, by all means, leave a couple light. That's what I intend to do. That's why it's good to have double lines for the mortars. You want to have a couple that maintain a goodly amount of dark. You could see the beginnings of the rhyme and reason of it. The same thing is going to happen to the arch around the doorway. Because the windows, the white facade around the windows is rather white, I put a little bit of shadow underneath the awning, and you could see that might look awfully dark. But once you put in the stipples and once all the other shadows are in, the white awning is going to really pop out, only because everything else has been addressed. Now, let me do a couple more of these and you can really see it pop out. The trick about this to really be effective is not be too much of an expert in the way buildings are built, because sometimes the amount of knowledge you have about structures can get in the way of just being able to draw something. You're going to be more worried about the knowledge of how many screws go into how many. It's just going to be it's going to be convoluted. You're better off having some artistic leeway. That's the thing about art to begin with. It's always good to have some amount of knowledge about. I like to keep my drawings very true. If you draw a house that's crooked, no matter how artistic you are, if it doesn't look like it stand up, it will not work. So I balance off my understanding of a structure by that. It's coming out rather nicely, if I don't say so myself. And it does hold true to the actual photograph. Some parts of the facade are darker than the rest. We're going to go into another segment, do the same thing, add a little bit more stipple in it. It's going to be a lot like the background. You got to take little bits of it and see what happens. The great thing is too that the stipple reduces down nicely. You can make this into a postage stamp size and it'll look fine. I'm going to put the steeple in as soon as I get a little bit more of this facade in. I like the fact that some of these are dark, some of these are light, almost like a calico effect, if you will. And I think that's the effect the builder had in mind. Let's try the next one to be a little bit lighter. The thing that's going to look really good is if you put it next to the window. The harsh, stark contrast of the darkness of the window as opposed to the gradual variety of the wall. It's going to be interesting. And the fact is, they're both types of stipple, but one's contained in what you obviously is a glass. It's just the amount of it. That's interesting. Okay. Let's try a little bit more. I think I want to do the outer part of this. And again, we're going to darken it up like crazy. Certain ones. And I think a little break would be, we'll go to the steeple. Well, let me just do a couple more of these. This one could be lighter. I think I'll make this one super dark. I'm always looking at the varieties, and you want to make sure you don't have two next to each other be the same. That is a kiss of death. You want to have variety. So you always make sure that if you do one that's relatively light, the next one to it's going to be a little bit darker. And I made a point there. I really darkened that one up. I think this one could be a lot lighter. I kind of like the fact that you could have all sorts of stuff happen in the course of let's say a brick. Little patterns could emerge. And it looks great. It looks intentional. We'll make this outer one real super dark and the one right next to it light. It's we're only halfway done, not even halfway, and you can see a pattern emerging. It's a nice feel. The structure looks crusty. There's a feel of it. You get almost the sensation of that type of coarseness is coming through. And I like it. It looks a lot like the type of stone we're looking at. And I really didn't measure anything. I didn't spend hours belaboring over it. Sometimes you really don't have to. A lot of people look at my work and they think I must go to great lengths measuring everything, and just belaboring of. I really don't. A lot of it, I'd say, a good 60% of it is just going ad-libbing. A lot of it has to do more with just understanding how pen and ink works. We'll make this one really light. And that's how we go through the whole structure. We try not to have two work close together being the same. It's really boring. Next one could be darker. And we have an exact half of one done. The whole point of all this is, again, to make sure no two segments look too much alike. That would go against the whole nature of the way this was constructed. So I think we're doing pretty good. I'm going to make this one dark. It works that way, and it adds to the illusion of it being a large building by having each one of these have a different identity. It's amazing what a little bit of this type of integrity adds to the whole structure. It just seems so much more intense, so much bigger. The area around the arch at this point becomes part of the rest of the building. The arch only holds up to that point. What we're going to do to make sure it's not that it has a presence, we're not going to make it as dark. We're going to lighten it up just a bit. It's really not in the photograph. I like the arch, and I want to keep it not as dark. We're still going to do a lot of individual segments to it. Okay, so here we go. I think in the next segment we're going to work on the steeple, try to get as much of that in as possible. If I get the steeple in, then we have a good section of the building in place. The bricks on this next part, the new part, this was added on, and I think was added on a couple of years ago, and it's a new part of the library. It's really nice, but it's interesting because it's a whole new type of architecture, and I love buildings that are, instead of being destroyed, they simply add on to, and the fact that it's a new type of architecture only enhances it, as far as I'm concerned. They did that with the New Britain Library, and I love that because we're talking 3 different architectures in one building. I think in the future I want to do all the libraries in Central Connecticut. I think they're all incredible. All right, let's do a couple more of these, even darker. Looks pretty good. We got a nice effect going for this whole half the building. I think it's pretty interesting. I know this is not the most exciting form of entertainment, but how often do you get to see how something like this is actually done? You see drawings like this and you wonder, my God, how did he do that? Well, I'm showing you all the sleight of hand. And I welcome anybody to try this. I did nothing more than go out there, photograph the building, do a rough sketch, and now I'm putting in some detail. I don't think it's beyond anyone's possibility of doing it. The hardest part about this is just figuring out a way to have these, to use a pen to come up with individual portions, that's all. So I'm going to darken up some individual bricks. I'm going to make some of these darker as I go along. Remember what I said. The best thing you do is not darken too much of it from the beginning, but wait to the very end and see what happens. Because if you darken up too early, you're going to be in big trouble. It's impossible to lighten up something once you've already inked it. I mean, you could take an X-Acto blade out and scratch it, but it always looks like you did. And personally, I don't like doing that. I think it's bad form. People can see it, and let's face it, it's an admission of guilt. I think I'll darken up this one a bit. Like I said, next time we'll work on the steeple. It's going to be fun.